Okay, now I'm going to install the main shaft assembly and the cluster shaft assembly into the main case. I've got it all cleaned up now. And I didn't really touch on the cluster shaft assembly because this is really simple to disassemble. The only special tools required are a good heavy-duty set of snap ring pliers. I have a set here at the shop that's a nice set with interchangeable ends on it. Some of them are a little thicker and heavier duty than others, but that's pretty much all you need to do it. So the main shaft assembly, basically you want to push it together as far as it'll go, and then back out the input shaft, an 1/8 inch or so, which will give you a little play to get the snap rings on the outside of the case. Then you just want to center up the sliders as good as you can and lift this into the case first. Just locating it on the forks. Then once it's in, you just want to push the input and the output shafts together, which will seat the snap rings against the case. And that's in. Next you have to install the collar, which ties the cluster shaft and the main shaft together. Just gives them a little extra support so they can't spread apart under load. I also wanted to mention that before you put this in, after you assemble the main shaft, there's a lot of slop here, and it'll kind of freak you out thinking, man, what did I do wrong? Well, once you install this in between the thrust bearings that we put in there, that picks up that slop. And you can put this in just like this, where you rotate it under, and it'll just rest there waiting for the cluster shaft to go in on it. So now our backlash is right where we want it. And I put just a thin little, just a little smear of silicone in the case half down here. It's probably not necessary, but I don't know, I do it. For some reason this G-Force came with a sealed front bearing. I don't think they normally do, but I always just add that on there. Next we'll add the cluster shaft. And the rear bearing has a snap ring on the cluster shaft. So you just want to push that forward. Now we just need to install the other half of the collar. And the collar has locating pins that kind of press in, ties everything together accurately, so it goes together the same every time. And then you just need to torque these down to 20 to 25 foot-pounds, and then this half of the case is assembled. Okay, before I button this up, I wanted to talk a little bit about a little problem that some people have when they're new to a faceplate transmission, and that's deadheading. And what happens is the lug on the faceplate and the lug on the slider are aligned. Sometimes when you're stopped and the internals of the transmission aren't turning, and if you go to put it in gear and they're aligned, it stops short and it's not in gear. And you'll know it because the shifter isn't as far forward as you're normally used to, or it doesn't move quite as far. So all you got to do there is just keep a little pressure on the shifter and just barely let the clutch out, just enough to move it over so it will engage fully in gear. a lot of times this will happen when you pull into the burnout box in first gear and push the clutch in when you're in position and then just go to put it in third gear without the internal spinning. And sometimes, you know, third or fourth gear, whichever you prefer, if they're lined up, then it's not going to go all the way in, and you do not want to start your burnout that way. So make sure it's fully in gear when you go to start your burnout. So now I've got everything, all the silicone where I want it. The case, I normally replace the O-ring around here, or I did last time anyway, and I use this, I believe it's 93 thousandths O-ring stock from MasterCar. It was really cheap to buy. I bought about 10 foot of it. And all you do is just peel it up and then just kind of just lay it in there and grease it up a little bit so it moves nicely. Mine's still raised up pretty good from replacing it last time, so I'm going to use it again. I hate to use silicone since there's an O-ring, but it seems like everybody does, so I just put a very small amount on the outward side of the O-ring all the way around. I put a little dab here and then put it in the groove here for the front plug. And I do use quite a bit there. This is the way I did it last time and it didn't leak, so I'm doing it that way again. I also slightly lubricate the O-ring with a little bit of grease, just so it's just got a little grease to it, and it'll help it seal up a little bit. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put this plug in. I also put a little bit around the face of the bearing. I don't know if that's the best way to do it, but that's the way I do it. So now that's on, everything's cinched up tight. Basically just drop it down on. Oh, I also put some right here on that so that in case anything seeps between the case halves, it's not gonna come back out around that bolt. Sometimes you got to give it a turn so the reverse gear meshes properly. And you'll get some of it squishes out here, and I'll usually just kind of smear it in a little bit, and then I'll do a final cleanup after I have everything torqued down. Now it's just a matter of adding all the bolts and torquing them all down. You also need to make sure the case halves are aligned when you do so. They're usually lined up pretty well once you get all the bolts in, and sometimes I'll even bolt on the front bearing retainer. Just snug it a little bit, just so that it kind of pulls the two together evenly. It seems like no matter what I do, there's usually some misalignment, but I don't think it hurts anything too much.